All right, good afternoon, everybody. Today is Thursday, February 3rd, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's installment of C-Suite Snacks. My name is Steve Ronan. I'm the leader of Citrin Cooperman's consulting and outsourcing practices, and I am the host of this webinar series. As companies grow, evolve, and enter into significant transformations, the scale and the depth of the management team becomes a critical set of their capabilities. Often these management teams benefit from outside advisors, especially as they engage in expansion, require new specialties where the current team lacks deep knowledge, have succession events, or potentially pursue other forms of growth. Having a board, either an advisory board or a board of directors, can be one of the best ways to close these gaps and leverage your management team to achieve those results. Today, we're joined by Mark Dailey, a partner with Newport LLC, who is a partnership focused on getting companies transaction ready. He's a seasoned executive with extensive international experience in Asia and Europe. He's been on 3 public, 6 private boards, and was lead director on a large regional not-for-profit, in addition to being a seasoned CEO, president, COO, and head of sales and marketing. Mark's one of the leading experts on advisory boards, especially for private companies, and is going to speak with us today about how to understand whether you need one, different models you can consider for your board, and best practices for making your board as effective as possible. As always, we ask you to submit questions throughout the webinar, so please take a minute to locate the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and feel free to enter any questions there as we go. We will be saving time at the end of today's presentation to address all the questions we receive. We will also be doing our weekly snack basket giveaway, where a lucky attendee from today's session will win a craft basket of snacks. The winner will be announced at the end of today's webinar. Finally, if you're here because you found it on our website, social media, or had somebody email it to you, I encourage you to sign up for our mailing list to make sure you receive an invite for our new snack-sized topics each week. Please also visit our C-Suite Snacks Content Hub on the Citrin Cooperman website to view the recordings from prior sessions and download the decks and contact information of the presenters. So, without further ado, Mark, I'd like to turn it over to you to begin today's session. Thanks for being here.
Terrific. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate the invitation and appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone. So the question is really around advisory boards. And what I want to do is move into really the difference between fiduciary boards and advisory boards. So do you really need one, and does it actually add value? So bear with me as there we go. Fiduciary boards versus advisory boards. Boards, all companies have, certainly all public companies have a fiduciary board. And that means that the boards have the responsibility of duty of care to protect all shareholders. Major shareholders, minor shareholders, doesn't matter if you own 2 shares or 55% of it. You need to have if you're public, you're going to have a fiduciary board. And those fiduciary boards are responsible for that duty of loyalty. Their votes actually count, and they have a variety of committees. But what we're going to do today is really focus on the advisory boards. So before I move off of fiduciary boards, you'll see that most private companies are going to have advisory boards, not fiduciary boards. And essentially the difference is that one of the biggest difference, votes don't count. So as we get into the variety of different types of situations, you'll see sometimes you're going to have fiduciary boards that for a private company, such as a PE-backed portfolio company, where you're going to have multiple shareholders. But advisory boards for a founder-led business, or for a second generation, third generation, or any type of other private company, they can't fire you and they can't force management action. So they're not going to be able to launch investigations. They are, as the term implies, they're advisors, and it's a board of advisors. So before I move off of this, let me just talk about committees. You've got statutory committees that are in the fiduciary boards You need to have an audit committee. You're going to have a nominating governance committee. You're probably going to have a compensation committee. You then, especially if you're a financial firm, you're going to have a risk committee. You can have enterprise risk committees. You can have a variety of other committees. It really depends on your industry. A lot of them actually, there are ESG committees now. There are also, if you're heavily involved, especially in energy, you can have advisory, rather you can have committees that are going to be really focused on climate change and impact. So in the advisory boards, usually they're going to be smaller. A fiduciary board could be anywhere from 7. I've been on boards up to 14. Advisory boards usually are going to be 4 to about 7 or so. You usually don't have a lot of individuals on it. So privately held businesses. So let's move off of publicly traded companies. We're going to be really focused on the privately held businesses. So first is private equity owners. If you've got institutional capital that's invested in your business, you're going to have, by definition, you're going to have at least 2 shareholders, you and the private equity. It's not unusual, though, for a private equity to actually do a club deal where they're going to bring multiple partners in. And so what you will have is that as part of the negotiation of the investment into the company, they're going to be negotiating 2 areas besides the valuation. But one is going to be board seats, and the other is going to be observer status. So the board is usually going to be comprised of the majority investors. The major investors, they are usually going to want to have 51%. Not a lot of boards, not a lot of private equity will be investing in businesses where they're going to take a minority position and allow unless it's a long-term with a founder that is eventually looking for an exit. But essentially what happens is that private equity comes in and they're going to want, they have venture capital. When I talk about private equity, I'm talking about both PE as well as venture capital. And what they're going to want is that they will want to have at least a 51% share of the voting shares. They will also possibly ask for observer status. So they may ask for 2 board seats and 1 observer. And usually the observer is going to be an analyst, someone who's going to be there to really kind of crunch the numbers for the investors. So you may have your top investor, maybe 2 board seats, 1 observer. The second largest, maybe 1 board seat, 1 observer. The third largest, maybe 1 board seat, no observers. So it will trickle down from there. Next, if you move on to founder-led. So these are going to be where you are the founder of the business. You've been running the business for a long time, whether it's 3 years or 30 years. But it could be a very informal board. And so it could be some advisors that could be fee advisors, such as your lawyer, your accountant, just giving you advice on the clock. You can also have, so that is the more informal. It can also range all the way to a very formal board. And that's where we've seen better success, is when you've had a more formal board. We'll get into that in subsequent pages, subsequent slides. The second generation owned board. Okay, now that's where the founder has turned the company and is now led by the second generation. So the founder has decided to maybe stay involved in the business, but usually the board is going to be whatever the founder started with, informal to formal, but is now could be including family and especially the founder offspring. So if they're involved in the business, you may end up having it where you're going to have the second generation, our 3 children, adult children, who are now going to be part of the board. They're running the business and they're going to be part of the board. It gets a little messier when you get into the third and subsequent generation owned businesses. And the reason is that you're going to have family members who are owners, some are employees and some are non-employees. And they can run the business. It depends on what perspective you're taking as an employee or a non-employee, but could be a source of friction, significant friction in families. And the reason is that the non-owners are going to think that the compensation is too generous to the employee owners. The employee owners are thinking that they're just riding, the non-employee owners are riding the coattails. And why are we giving them such a large dividend? We should plow it back into the business. What you do need to do is make sure that you avoid family tree champions. And that is when you've got the third or subsequent generation, you've got a family, you've got, say, 3 different families and all related. But what they're going to end up doing is that they're going to make sure they want to get their champion onto the board. The second family is going to want to make sure they've got someone who is going to be there advocating for their point of view. The third is going to be a champion looking for an advocation of their point of view. The important thing to remember as a board member, you've got to make sure that you are representing all shareholders, not just one. And so that's why you want to avoid the family tree champions. So advisory boards for privately held companies, you've got a whole spectrum of possibilities. As I said earlier, it could be just a board of friends. It could be your neighbors. It could be just people that your country club, your golf club, your sailing club, since I'm a sailor, so your yacht club. It could be, your hunting buddies. It could be whatever you think is advice that you're going to receive that is valuable. The important thing is you do need to listen to them. Even though their vote doesn't count, you do need to listen to them. You can also have current family advisors. As I said earlier, the legal and financial advisors. Someone who's going to say, bring in your lawyer. And it really depends on what is the vision for the company. Do you want to sell the company and have a transaction in the near term? And that could be anywhere from 1 year out to 10 years out. If your vision is actually to keep the business in the family for long term, then you're going to have to start working with both legal and financial advisors to figure out the structure, especially when it comes to the partnership agreements, especially for the second generation, and even more importantly for that third generation. So the family council, and this is we've seen has actually worked quite well. And what you've got is a family council, which is really looking at all of the assets. It's different. Let's, for this example, assume that it's going to be a company, rather a family council that has got at least 2 assets. Maybe it's a company and its real estate holdings. Maybe it's 2 different companies. Maybe it's 6 different companies. So you have a family council that's going to run it for the benefit of the family. But when it comes down to the actual board for that particular business, then you want to make sure that you've got really the outside advisors that can really talk about and help you with that business. So family council works well with 2 assets or more. You would also have that's where a good place to have the subsequent generations be able to actually have hopefully not a vote as much as they want to be heard. That's usually going to be a family majority. You might have an outside advisor or 2 help you with that. Could be a CFO that you've worked with in the past. Could be a partner, could be your old law partner, as you see fit. Then you move into a non-family majority. And a non-family majority says that you've got you as the CEO, possibly the second generation is involved in the business. What you've done now is you've created a board, even though it's still non-voting, you would have a board that is going to be made of a majority is going to be outside advisors. Now, these outside advisors may not be legal and financial. They may be business development contacts, people that you know, someone that if you're looking to go into adjacent markets, could be someone who knows that market. You could be in the energy market and you want to get into oil field services market. So this is where it's an adjacent market. It can also be people that have got skills, as I move on to the next page, skills that you don't have in the executive team. Now, there's a difference between having skills that as an employee versus skills as the board. Keep in mind, there's a good rule of thumb for boards, and that is the saying is noses in, fingers out. That means that as a board member, you can discuss anything with the CEO. You cannot actually you should not contact the board, the actual managers of the business. So you've got to observe that chain of command that really says between you and that manager is going to be the CEO, the founder, the chairman of the board. But you may also have situations where you don't have, such as a geographic expansion, skills that are in the board, rather in the management team, but they are in your board. So you may have someone that you want to get into Saudi Arabia, you'd like to get into the Middle East, you'd like to get into Europe. Find a board member who's actually got experience developing those markets. So it could be business development. And so you're looking for someone who's got, I've got a colleague of mine right now who's on a board because he's in the fire protection business. He's been in the business for 20, 25 years. And so he's just recently joined the board because he's able to parlay those contacts into business development. You've got the adjacent market, as I said earlier, about oil, energy, and oil versus oil field services. Filling the skills gaps in the executive team, geographic expansion. But the board really is there to drive strategy and performance. And it's so important as a founder, you're usually not held accountable. And a board is going to hold you accountable. Now, I go back to their vote doesn't count. You can disregard their input. You can disregard the being held accountable. You'll also probably lose those board members because they realize this is a waste of time and you don't listen to my advice. But holding a CEO's feet to the fire, and this is not on a weekly call saying, hey, did you hit your numbers? This is really on a quarterly basis saying, how do we do? Did we hit the numbers? If we didn't hit the numbers, why didn't we hit the numbers? What were the gaps? What are we going to do to fix the gaps? And that's usually, it's good to have that someone holding you accountable because that's going to actually make the whole business better. It is going to actually drive performance and it's going to be the sounding board for strategy. You may decide that you want to go into a geographic expansion. You may decide that you want to try to run that from Stamford, Connecticut. You may get a board that will tell you, don't do that. You really got to make sure you got someone's feet on the ground. So then the question is, so how do you actually get into Europe? Do we want to go into London with Brexit? Do you want to go into Paris? Do you want to go into Germany? So a good sounding board, and they're going to be able to help you in the markets that you don't have experience, but they do. The next bullet point is really around strategic versus a tactical frame of mind. When you're in the business, you're fighting fires. You're not building a sprinkler system. In the board, you're building a sprinkler system. You're not fighting fires. Monday morning opens up, you're going to be looking at, you're trying to figure out how you lost a sale over the weekend. You all of a sudden your head of HR has decided to retire or quit. You're going to have just a handful of fire drills. And that's the nature of being a CEO. You're always going to be looking for what's my biggest problem and how do I solve it? So it's not like a whack-a-mole that you're going to solve this problem. And as soon as that problem gets solved, something relatively speaking is going to pop up and say, that's now my biggest problem. It's very difficult to sit back and actually give thought to your business. So unfortunately, you're going to spend time in the business when you really need to spend time on the business. So board of directors will help you with the strategy. It is still the responsibility of your management team to put forward to put forward the strategic plan. But it's the board's responsibility to give you that honest and objective insights into how the plan could be better. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right skill set? Do you have actually enough capital? What you want to do is you've got to make sure that you've got people, process, capital, all aligned at the same time. So best practices of advisory boards. Treat your advisory board the same way a public company treats its fiduciary board. Take it seriously. Set the meeting schedule. It's a rolling 12 to 18 months in advance. Write an agenda and stick to it. Make sure that you need to make sure that this is sent out well ahead of the board meeting. I've had boards where we'll get board books on the night before the meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning. Not sure how we're supposed to read 200 pages. So what you've got to do is make sure that you treat it, it's a serious endeavor. So set the meeting schedule, set the agenda, stick to the agenda, respect the board's opinions and time. So let me talk about, if you say it's a 3-hour meeting, stick to 3 hours. That means that you're going to have to make sure that you move through that agenda. So you actually should be putting times. It's 10 minutes to talk about a new CTO. It's going to be 15 minutes to talk about a marketing campaign. It's going to be 30 minutes to talk about revenue. Whatever it is, make sure you schedule it out. Respect your board's opinions. It's frustrating as a board member to be asked your opinion. You give good advice. You've spent a lot of time, and the advice goes out the window, or they don't have time to act on it. There's no reason to be involved in that board. You're just giving, it's essentially a waste of your time as a CEO and founder, and it's the waste of the time of the board member, and they will quickly see that. If you've got multiple shareholders, and this is it, doesn't matter if we're talking about venture capital, private equity, a second generation, especially on third generation, keep minutes. You don't have to employ a secretary, a corporate secretary. You can ask I've had a board where we had the company's outside attorney to keep the minutes. And the reason you want to keep the minutes, in case anything comes back from one of the shareholders. And so what you'll do, by the way, when it comes to keeping minutes, you always are going to keep track of what was discussed, not what was said. So they're not looking, you don't want quotes. You want to have a discussion that we looked at, we discussed a view of expanding into Europe, and the thoughts were around the different locations and potential partnerships. Not that Steve said that we should only go into Paris and not into Brexit, or not into London. So the final one is respect your hat. So you got to wonder, what are you talking about? Respect your hat. Respecting your hat means that you've got several hats, depending on what type of company you've got. If you're an outside CEO of a private equity based company, you've only got one hat. It's the CEO. Maybe you're a CEO and you're the chair. Probably not unless you were the founder. If you were the founder, you probably are CEO and chair. You've got a different hat as chair versus a different hat as a founder. I'm sorry, as a chair versus as a CEO. More importantly is if you're a founder-led company and you've got the second generation, you've got to make sure that you wear your hat as I am a father or mother versus a CEO. You've got to make sure that the second generation or the third generation are members of are wearing the hat as an employee or as a family member. You've got to make sure you separate those decisions, and you speak, when you're speaking, you're conscious of what hat you're wearing. The reason is that you've got to make sure that you're sending the right message, and you're also making sure that you are not cutting people in or out of conversations they should or should not be in. So with that, Steve, I believe I've run a little later than I expected.
All right, Mark. So you can just leave your contact info up there in case people have questions that we can't get to right now. But we've got a few that have come in. So first, on the topic of attorneys on the board, which you mentioned a couple of times, can it be, or is there ever a situation where it would be a conflict of interest for an attorney sitting on an informal board and having them get compensated for it?
Of having an attorney on
your
attorney on a board, on your board, no, they're still going to be able to give you. It's an advisory board, okay? It's not a fiduciary board, so you're just paying for that advice.
Perfect. And from the perspective of paying for your advisory boards, are there any sorts of pay structures that you typically see on these kind of more informal advisory board structures?
It really depends. Yeah, look, you can get what you pay for. Okay, that's the first rule of thumb. What you want people to have a serious commitment to your board. You want to make sure that your board is going to be able to give you that unfiltered advice. I've seen it anywhere from advisory boards that are unpaid to, I would say, maybe about $30,000 I'll see. It depends on what's the budget on the company, depends on how quickly the company is growing. It also depends if you want to, if you've got a transaction in your future. And the reason is that you really do need to have a more structured board. And if you're trying to become transaction ready, you want to make sure that you've got the best advice. So that's where you'll probably pay more for that.
Makes sense. After you get the board set up, those first couple of meetings, and you're kind of getting everybody situated and aligned with what you're hoping to get out of them, do you have any best practices for what the agendas for those meetings might potentially look like?
It's going to actually look very similar to a board that is a fiduciary board, which is you're really going to want to look at the audit committee is going to actually do the review beforehand. By the way, on boards, especially fiduciary boards, all the work actually gets done in the committees, okay? And then they present to the board as a whole. So the audit committee will go through a lot of the financial results and bubble up the high points as part of the.
Right. All right. Perfect. I think Mark cut off at the end a little there, but we got through it. So if Mark, just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. Really, really appreciate your time and expertise. This is a topic that we've heard clients talk about a lot over the last year or two as businesses have been changing so much at such a faster pace. And I'm sure there's a lot of people today who will find this content really valuable. So appreciate you joining us. There are a couple questions we didn't get to, and we will answer those offline. So we'll reach out to the folks whose questions we didn't get to offline.
Happy to help.
I've had the opportunity to work with Mark and his partners at Newport a number of times, as have a number of my partners. They do great work in helping their clients' executives teams mature and really focus the direction of their business. So if you have further questions or want to understand more about their services, please reach out to him. His info is on the screen and will be available on the recording and Content Hub posting for today's session. Today's snack basket is going to go to Steve Weaver of Atlantic Cape Fisheries. Steve, thanks so much for being here. Somebody will reach out for shipping information shortly. Finally, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Mark, could you just go to the last slide for me? Next week, we have a really great session, Modern Decision Support. If you're a CFO, if you're a controller, CEO, wants to really understand how you can use budgeting, forecasting, better financial reporting, KPIs, analytics to run your business better. We're going to start talking about this in this session. There's going to be a handful of sessions building on this as well. So this is a great place to get introduced. Dominic DiBernardo, who runs our performance management practice, will be joining me for next week's webinar. Finally, thank you for everybody joining us today. Please watch your emails for upcoming invites, for the posting of today's webinar. And we really hope you enjoyed today and look forward to seeing you in future weeks. Have a great rest of your week and weekend, and look forward to seeing everybody soon. Thanks again.
Thank you, Steve.